Okie. I think I'm good here. Let's see. Is this the right mic? Is it working? Yes, it is. It looks like it is anyway. And so hopefully if you're watching this, you can hear me as well. Good morning. Good to see people on the stream. According to Twitch, there are several people watching, and I can see a lot of you online in Discord. So good morning. It's good to see you all here. As usual, if you don't mind, just say hello in the chat in Discord so I know who's here, and I can refer back to this day later if I need to. My voice feels scratchy today. I don't know why. Today, yeah, sorry I got going a little late today. No real excuse other than I was putting together the slideshow and I kept like adding stuff and wanting to explain stuff differently, and then I was like, oh, it's 9:55, so I apologize for that, but I think this will be actually a little shorter, or at least I hope it is, because I want to give you some ideas and then let you work on some things on your own and then come back together like we did yesterday. I thought that worked well, so I thought we could do that again, but with a different emphasis today and a different set of things to do. So let me share the slides in Discord if you prefer to look at them that way. Everything should be in there. There are some links too in the slideshow, which I will need to. I can also share with you directly in Canvas. I just, as I was putting things together, I ran out of time. So where's my link? I still have it on the clipboard actually. So there we go. Our slides. And I appreciate it. I think Kelly's usually the one posting these in the resources channel. I think that's great. So, go ahead and do that again if you want to, or not, I don't know. But yeah, if you look through it, there's a few things, and like I thought it worked well yesterday to kind of include some more of the announcement, administrative kind of stuff in the actual slideshow, so I can just present it. But I also do want to show you some things in Canvas too. So let me get started here. Let's see. I like to, and I'm running these things in multiple tabs. By the way, another thing, just to mention, I changed some settings on my stream that I think are going to let it display more smoothly. I basically lowered the resolution on the Canvas in OBS and on my webcam, and I think that's improving the frame rate. At least it did seem to do better when I tested it last night. So let me know if you can tell a difference. I'm curious to see if it makes a difference in terms of what you're seeing. But hopefully you can hear me okay, and that's I guess the most important thing. But I did notice when I was looking at the playback from yesterday's video that I was unhappy with the frame rate on me. Like, not that I'm like the most important part of this, but it just was distracting me how the frame rate looked like 8 frames a second or something. It looked really bad. So which is disappointing because I just got a new video card, and it's not like an amazing video card. It's definitely like low tier video card, but it was like much newer than the original one that seemed to do actually a little better in terms of frame rate. So anyway, there's always these settings and things to play with in OBS. Basically, I've started making plans to just get a whole new PC, and there's that website pcpartpicker.com, I think, and you can kind of build out your system there. I've started daydreaming and fantasizing about another system. Okay, so let's take a look at a few things that in Canvas. They'll come up on the slideshow actually, so let me do it this way. This is just the structure for today, 10 a.m. or 10:10 or 10:15, whatever it ended up actually being, live stream on Twitch, and then let's do a 1 p.m. Discord conversation like we did yesterday. I could put it to a vote, but it was unanimous yesterday to prefer Discord over Zoom, and I think that's fine, especially because we're dealing with writing today, and so we can write about writing. I think that sort of makes sense. On your own, you're going to be doing a couple things. I'm going to give you a list of short readings to read between now or when I'm done and 1. And then you should also complete the 4th gaming journal, but probably do that later. I haven't even created that discussion page yet, so no rush on that, but please try to do it today. You have a 5th journal due tomorrow, along with a weekly reflection and the close playing project, which I do want to say a few things about. Tomorrow's schedule, I might stream, I might not, I don't know. It won't be a lecture, it won't be required, whatever it is. I was thinking I might just keep playing Edith Finch, because I played that for about an hour last night and really enjoyed it. It's something that, I feel like I have some things to say about it, because it does interesting things with typography and houses, and those are two things that I've done, like in some of my other scholarly lives, I have done some work on. So I'm interested in saying some things about Edith Finch, but also just playing it, and I might as well stream it. So that's probably all I'll do tomorrow, other than kind of work through grading and responding to your work. That's the main thing I do. Like, I think of Fridays as kind of catch-up days for both you and me. So that's mainly what I intend to do tomorrow with regard to this class. Also, I just saw this notice come through from the registrar. I believe tomorrow is the deadline to withdraw from this class or switch it to PF, pass-fail. It is a lot. I'm seeing you all commenting on Edith Finch. And I can think of different ways you might mean that word a lot. I think, like so far at least, I've just played the first like level thing, like the where you go through like I think her name is Molly. You go through her room and you turn into a cat and then an owl. I thought that was just beautiful, but super creepy. And also, like, the one thing I'm gonna keep an eye out for as I play this is, like, does the tone ever break? Because it's so relentlessly sad. I feel sort of overwhelmed by that. So I feel like artwork that wants to be sad can do that, but I feel like it often is better if that's balanced in some ways. And so far, anyway, it's really kind of hitting one note over and over again emotionally. So I'm curious to see what else happens in the game, and maybe, or as Beck's saying, maybe there's not much else. Okay, cool. So let's, I'm looking forward to finishing it. Okay, so again, I think tomorrow is the deadline to withdraw. I'm not sure, and I ran out of time to look this up, but I don't know for sure if the alternative grading scale is available for this term. My hunch is that it is not, but if someone feels like looking that up, it should be on the registrar's webpage. If you want to look it up and tell us in Discord, that would be great. I could do that later if you don't know how to find that, but I don't think it's available. So if you are concerned about the class and what your grade is, I guess you could consider withdrawing or pass-fail, but I will just say at this point, any of you, it still has plenty of opportunities to get a decent grade in the class. Like, there's no, like, everything is so compressed here, and I'm not worried about things being turned in late, other than I hope you do them on time so you don't kind of build up a ton of work for yourself right at the end. But if that's what you have to do, it's possible, and that could still be okay in terms of a grade. So everyone's still potentially fine. But if you do want to just, if you change your mind about the class or just don't want to do that last work or whatever it is, I think tomorrow is the last day to make that change. So anyway, if you are considering it and want some advice, then just let me know. Okay, so today's topic is, I wanted to talk about the upcoming close playing project a little bit first. By the way, to see that here, I haven't graded, you can see my screen here, this is my instructor view of this class. You can see I haven't graded the commercials yet, but I can also see here that about 7 of you still haven't submitted the reflection from last week, so make sure you do that. That's an important part of this class because that's your way of explaining to me what you've been learning and doing, and that includes things like watching the streams and reading the homework and stuff like that. So that's important, so please do that, and you can do it retroactively for week 1 if you still haven't, of course, but there will be another one of those due tomorrow. Okay, so, and I'll add maybe some prompts for the one that's due tomorrow, just to kind of give you some suggestions. Okay, so here's the close playing project. I've talked about this a bit. I don't think I've actually gone through the assignment description on the stream yet, so let me just do that real quick. I'm not going to stand here and read the whole thing, but the premise here is that we're doing a kind of analysis of video games, and just in terms of its structure, it's borrowed from literary studies, the idea of literary studies, where you do a kind of formal analysis of some part of a text, focusing on a small element of that text in order to understand and interpret larger things within the text. So you look at maybe a single line from a sonnet to try to understand what Shakespeare was doing with sonnets. And a close reading can be very, very close in literature. Like, you can look at word histories, you can look at multiple meanings of different words, you can look at punctuation, even typography and other things. Like, you can really dig into it. But of course, when we look at video games, we have other things to dig into, so that's kind of what we've been talking about this week. Hopefully that's starting to make sense. The idea is similar, though, that you're going to use that moment that you've identified in your game as significant to try to explain something bigger about the game that you think is important to know. And you'll see examples of people doing things like that in the assigned readings for today, so I'll show you that when we get to that point. I think So Ryan, I think it is available on Xbox if you're talking about Edith Finch. So the things you should do, first of all, you've been playing a game this week and writing about it in your journal. So you need to find a moment to focus on. You probably will need to complete the game in order to find a moment that you can sort of justify as being representative in some way. But even if you haven't, you could probably still find something interesting. So it really depends on the point you're making. But find that moment. I would like for you to record yourself playing that moment. You don't have to describe it while you're doing it if that's hard to do or inconvenient to do. If you feel like it's important to explain what's going on for someone who might not have any idea what you're doing, then that could be helpful, but it's not really required to talk over it. But I do want you to be the one playing it, right? I don't want you to find a clip on YouTube. I don't want you to watch somebody on Twitch playing it. I want you to actually be the one playing it and then actually record it. I'm not worried about the quality of the recording. I'm interested in the, authenticity of you being the experiencer of that moment. So if you need to point your camera, if you have a phone camera, you need to point that at a screen and record it that way, that's fine. If you're playing on a PC or a Mac, you can use OBS to record your screen. That's what I do. If you are playing on a console, sometimes they have a built-in screen recording feature. Sometimes they don't, but in either way, I do want you to try to do it yourself. Looking for 20 to 60 seconds. If it's 62 seconds, not a big deal, right? I mean, I'm not super concerned about the exact time here. But that's I just want to keep it short. So about a minute is the upper level of what I'm interested in here. So keeping it short, in other words, so that you can go close, right? So as you look at it, you can look at it in a lot of different ways. We've talked about we did what I think is called sometimes the system, the inventory of dynamics that we talked about yesterday. You could do that. You could also look at kind of textual analysis, which is what we're going to talk about today, and kind of just do that research or thought process to figure out what's going on there and what you want to say about it, and then explain what you want to say. So this should be around 800 words. This is a ballpark, of course, but it's meant to say 800 words is something that's going to require you to get into some depth with this and actually have something to say. That's the meaning, or that's my sense of that length anyway. So that depends on how you write, typographically, what fonts you prefer and so on. So it's probably around 3 pages, depending on what you're used to, but probably around 3 pages of double-spaced Times New Roman. As far as what you submit here, I don't care if it's Times New Roman or double-spaced. Those things make no difference to me as long as I can read the words that you've written. That's what I'm interested in. And so bear in mind, if you do it in a weird font like Jokerman ITC, I'm gonna have a hard time reading it just because that's a hard font to read. But if you choose something like Comic Sans, also not a great font for reading a big paragraph of text. It's okay for certain things, but not that. But anyway, just choose. don't worry too much about the formatting. Think about the writing. And if you do need to cite sources, and I think you might find some sources, especially among the things that I'm going to ask you to look at today, do cite them and use MLA-style citations. This is meant to be an academic essay, but I'm not requiring a minimum number of citations because this isn't necessarily research, this is analysis. And so really the highlight of your writing is your own ideas and not other people's ideas that you're quoting. If you find it helpful to use someone else's way of explaining something to help make your point, that's okay, and that's when you might need a citation. But otherwise, focus on your own words. All right, so I saw some words in Discord. What are you all doing here? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot I had the music on still. Yeah, let me do that. I'll just turn it off. I don't need it on. Okay, cool. So, for Maddie K, what are you asking? If you can, I don't really understand your question. So Maddie K is asking, can I read it out, all the paragraphs? I don't really understand what you're saying. You mean read it out loud? Okay. No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. No, you. You could, I guess, but I want to see you kind of making the decisions and whatever, playing with the interface, I guess. But sometimes there might be a lot of text that might take you more than a minute to read. So I'd say it's up to you. If it's like a short paragraph and it's helpful for you to read it out loud, okay, but not required. And yeah, you can. And so Kelly asked another good question. You can definitely use the first person, absolutely, especially because you're going to be talking about your experience. And so it makes a lot of sense to say, when I first started playing Edith Finch, I was confused. Sentences like that would make a lot more sense than like, this researcher first observed that when upon opening the screen, one finds that there is not much to know about it. Like, it's super awkward. So definitely write in the first person. Like, you're going to be talking about your observations, and that will be based on your experience. And so that's what the first person is for, as a language, as a component of the English language. So yes, please use first person. You should use first person. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So any other questions, feel free to put them in chat. I'm going to move on with the slides here and some ideas, and then if I can certainly get back to questions if they come up. Okay, so the title of today and the theme for today is textual analysis and criticism, but I actually want to put that in a slightly different context than simply writing or the kinds of things we do academically, because we're talking about video games, and writing about a video game is one way to engage seriously with the content of the video game and say interesting things about it. But due to the nature of video games and the history, there have been ways of engaging with the content of video games beyond simply being entertained by them for a long time. And there are a couple of interesting modes of doing that are unique to video games that I thought I would talk a little bit about. First of all is the idea of the high score. You might remember this image from the other day, actually last Thursday, when I showed you the clip from Tron. This is Flynn, Jeff Bridges playing the character Flynn, accomplishing a high score in a video game. And the idea of a high score in an arcade is a kind of mastery. It represents a kind of social status. It's something that requires a deep understanding of the gameplay and often practice and skill, and you really start breaking down the game as a problem to be solved and a skill set to be mastered, as opposed to just something to have fun with for a while. And so that takes us beyond that experience of just entertainment to a kind of engagement, and that kind of engagement makes possible that social structure, that social status of the high score. So high scores are interesting, and Twin Galaxies is an arcade in Iowa that is known, and this is like an older picture of what they looked like in the 1980s. I don't know what they look like now, but they are or were an arcade, and they also host and maintain and verify video game high score records, like world records, and they do that on behalf of the Guinness Book by now. So if you look up world records for certain things related to video games, like high scores, Twin Galaxies is the organization now that makes that happen. Really interesting, and also like I don't have a slide for this, but they're still doing this. And there was a couple years ago, and every now and then, this seems to happen like every couple years, like there will be some controversy, like somebody's claim from like 1978 turns out to be fraud. And that was one of the things that Twin Galaxies early on, they developed practices for like refereeing high scores. So if you got a high score in Donkey Kong, you would send them a VHS tape of you achieving that high score, or maybe take a photo of your screen if it's a game that you can pause. And so then their job would be to like validate, like, is that real or was that photoshopped or edited in a certain way to make it look, better than it actually was. And then, the best verification is to actually have a referee on site to watch you play it in person, but that's not always possible. And so there's a whole sort of industry and community around trying to achieve high scores, and really interesting. And if you want to know more about this, so this documentary, King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, is really good. You might have heard of it or seen it. It's available on different streaming platforms now. I have opinions about it, but I think it's good. I think, like a lot of documentaries, it sets up a narrative. It like records people, but then it kind of tells a story. And the story it wants to tell is about a story of conflict between two expert Donkey Kong players. And they kind of make one guy the hero and one guy the villain. And some of the discussion afterwards said maybe some of that was kind of contrived by the documentarians and the editors of it to build it up into something more than what it was. They really make Billy Mitchell the villain of the movie, and that might not be deserved. It's hard to say, but it's really entertaining. The other thing I will say about it is that, like a lot of movies that focus on a niche culture, there is an element of it blends like celebrating this the exuberance of this community and the interest they have, but there's also a pretty strong undercurrent of like, let's look at these weirdos doing this weird thing. And that's something you see a lot in like documentaries about a niche culture. Like it's sort of meant for everyone else, whatever that is. And it's sort of exposing these, focusing on the obsessions and the awkwardness and so on. And that, you get a sense of that somewhat in this movie. But I think it's also really good just as far as history of the arcade game. I have the trailer here in the slide, but I don't think I'm going to show it. This is Billy Mitchell, and he's set up to be the villain. But it's, it's one of those documentaries too, where you watch the trailer, you can kind of get the whole sense of it. But yeah, I'm not going to actually show it right now. You can watch it on your own later. Okay, so the other sense of engagement beyond simply play for entertainment is, of course, speedruns. And speedruns occupy actually a lot of Twitch, which is what I'm streaming with right now, and Let's Plays. I don't have a slide for Let's Plays, but it's another category of engaging with video games beyond simply playing, and often Let's Plays can be very erudite and thoughtful and so on. Similarly, speedruns can be super intense in terms of the way that these expert game players engage with their video game that they're an expert on as a kind of system. I just looked this up. I didn't realize, but the Super Mario Brothers 80% record, I guess a new record was set a week ago. So I took this screenshot this morning from speedrun.com. So pretty cool. It's sort of amazing how much time people have been able to shave off of this, and also looking at how minimal the thresholds are, like how much of a record that is like 70, 80 milliseconds. It's not much, but it counts. So that's the kind of thing that we can record and talk about. But watching these players do this, I think, can be really interesting. And I have this one here. This is Cosmic doing the third place speed run record. And I think just kind of watching the gameplay, I have the audio off, so I can talk instead of him. But as you can see, the gameplay does not look like when I play Super Mario Brothers or when my kids do. It's where we're kind of fumbling around, trying different things. What we're watching here is someone who has mastered this and optimized every action, every jump, every hitbox. One of the coolest things to watch players like this do is jump over the the piranha plants, and just like they're able to hit the pipe without hitting the plant because they know the hitbox so well for where the collision will happen. And when they get a series of those, it can be really cool to watch. Let's see. Well, I think there's some of that coming up, so I'll just let it play for a second. But you can certainly watch a lot of these on Twitch, and that's really what Twitch is kind of set up to do, is these kinds of things. And so let's see. Yeah, so things like the double hitting both of the Goombas there, timing those jumps just perfectly, and apparently effortlessly. Like he's chatting while he's doing all these things that to me would take tons and tons of practice and trial and error, and it really is a kind of beautiful thing to watch. So anyway, yeah, they do seem so chill. I mean, that's the thing. It's like and I think it's gotta be. I mean, there's some basic skill, but like there's also he's talking about subpixel glitching, and so like that's basically trying to hit a joint between where two pixels are trying to be, and like trying to glitch through something that way. There are different kinds of categories of speedruns. There are categories that like employ glitches, and then there's categories where like you get a record without glitching. So let's see. I mean, so he does use warps in this playthrough, and that's how you get to that 4 minutes 55 seconds or whatever it is. Let's see. Let's see if we can get to the end here. You can see he's getting close. Yeah, you notice his body language. Like, look how much. I just jumped ahead a minute, but look how much more tense he is now because he realizes he's actually got a chance of a record. That's kind of interesting, actually. I didn't notice that before. So we're getting there. We're down to, I guess, the last. Yeah, it's getting close. Let's just watch this. I'm actually just kind of interested in watching this. So, like, look how fast that was. Like, I could not. Like, just even though every little piece of this adding up, and like, yeah, like that subpixel jumping, like hitting the side of a pipe to jump up it. Like, I don't even know how to do that. But he does it effortlessly, right? I mean, and that they all do. Like the speedrunners do that. It's just sort of like it's in their tool bag of skills, and I imagine that if you want to be someone who does this, you just practice and practice and practice and practice for hours and hours. Wow, that's so cool. Oh man, okay, I'm excited, and he's pretty excited too. But it's like a sport, right? I mean, it's not so much gameplay as it is like executing a sport, like a like an athlete would, like a golfer or something. So really interesting. And there is actually, I thought you should know about this organization called Games Done Quick, and they have a Twitch channel. This is just a screenshot of their Twitch channel, but it's twitch.tv/Games Done Quick. And they do speedrun marathons. And so what you can do is watch them and then donate money to different causes that they promote. And so it's really pretty entertaining. And what I like about Games Done Quick too is that you will often have a runner, like someone playing, and then one or two commentators. So just like in golf, you have someone, like I don't play golf, so if I understand the goals of the game and I understand how it works, but I often don't appreciate the nuances of what's going on. So it's helpful to have a commentator, or like running, right? Like if you watch a marathon coverage on TV, like people running, it's not super interesting for like an hour and a half of that marathon. The last 30 minutes usually get pretty exciting, but you kind of have to have someone explaining what's going on and what different runners are doing and kind of, what their history is. And so it's similar with Games Done Quick, and it's really helpful to see, what's going on and have somebody explaining different techniques and so on. It can be very entertaining. So I recommend it. They got a lot of videos, obviously. I think they just wrapped up this year's marathon like a couple days ago. But check them out. They're cool. So so let's talk then about, of course, the main type of engaging deeply with video game content, which is writing about video games. And this is just a screenshot from the game Myst, and then I put the title on that because I thought that was clever of me. This is a couple things. So in thinking about how people have written about video games, I think there's a couple of interesting histories, and we don't have time to go into all these, but the idea of like writing a kind of deep analysis of a video game could have a couple different purposes, and one would be to explain how to beat the video games, and that was actually the first kind of serious like long form writing about video games outside of kind of trade or entertainment coverage. So of course trade publications had a lot of description and not really analysis, but like advertising essentially for video games. But different publishers starting in the 1970s published like guides, and you can see how they're focused. These two at least are focused on like how to play these things, how to be good at them, because this was back in the 1970s when really arcade games were very much more like they were much more skill focused, not much storytelling, not really thought of as like a cultural text yet, although they certainly were. But at this time anyway, people were focused on like, how do I win? How do I be like Flynn in Tron and impress all my friends? And so that's so lots of guides related to that, and of course you can see the datedness of these with their references, and also the types of handheld games over here on the right. Right, these are pretty old. This is the Usborne computer and video games, how they work and how to win, and how to win at Nintendo games. Of course, video game magazines are also a big deal, and these really had their heyday in the 90s, I think 80s and 90s. So several, like there was Atari had Atari Age, and Nintendo had Nintendo Power. Sega had one too, I'm pretty sure. So this is, and probably other publishers, Amiga. I know Amiga had a magazine. So these are, this is a big part of kind of video games popular culture. And before the internet, before the web, this is how you learned about the new Battletoads game coming out. You would see the Electronic Gaming Monthly. I did have a subscription to EGM for a while, and I remember reading it. You'd see the screenshots, you'd see analysis and commentary and reviews, and really talking about it. But this was very much all about, at least for EGM and Nintendo Power, it was very much about hype. Like it was just sort of hyping up what's coming out and sort of celebrating what's already come out. Like they're all pretty. It was rare to read a bad review of anything, and also just really focused on kind of evaluating the entertainment potential for different games and like how much fun certain things could be or not. And so that was obviously there certainly are and were ways you could do game reviews that are interesting and actually focus on interpretation and analysis, but that's not necessarily the emphasis and not really what the audience is expecting in 1991 from Electronic Gaming Monthly, right? So that's something that emerges a little bit later. Another form of writing that has these two, like these two are the only like early examples that I know of, and there might be others, but the idea of like a video game essay is something that I'm intrigued by and that we're going to look at today. And these two examples from 82 and 83 respectively are kind of unusual, and they kind of stand out when you look back. At least there may be other things like them, but they might be more obscure. But these are the two that I know, and really interesting. So Pilgrim and the Microworld, I'm going to ask you to read a segment, the first two chapters of that today. They're short chapters. It's essentially a memoir or an autobiography by David Sudnow, who was a psychologist, and he kind of analyzed himself, almost more like an ethnography, because he analyzes himself and the kind of gradual process by which he becomes addicted to the Atari game Breakout. And then he talks about how he kind of found his way out of that. But it's a really interesting study of gameplay and game design and psychology, but it's also really written in a really intense way, and I enjoy the writing of it. So as far as the writing style, it's written more like new journalism than it is written like psychology, and so you'll see what I mean when you read it. But it's really interesting, very much focused on his specific experiences. Martin Amis, I haven't actually read this one because it's hard to find, but I'll see if I can interlibrary loan a copy, because it was just reprinted. I discovered today. This book has been reprinted, but Martin Amis is I think, is he still alive? I can't remember, but he's a British novelist and sort of icon of like high culture literariness, and so it was unusual at the time, and even still, for him to be writing a book about space invaders. So I'm actually curious about that one. I haven't read it, so I'm looking forward to. No, wait, come to think of it, maybe I have read it. I think I have read it, but I can't remember much from that experience of having read it. But I remember it being unusual. If I read it, it would have been, probably 18 years ago. So anyway, I'll take a look and see if I can get another copy, because I'm intrigued. Okay, so I'm actually nearing the end of the slides here, because I want to get you started on something. But and if we look at sort of the big picture of ways that people write about video games, these are very, very broad and very much like a Venn diagram. These are just a couple of notes about different kinds of writing that you will encounter and that I've certainly encountered. So the first is the review, the game review. This is pretty intuitive and straightforward, like a movie review. The focus is on a qualitative evaluation, like, is this a good movie? Is this a good game? That's probably the first level, but also I think a well-written review is also like noting what is good about it or what is bad about it, like helps you understand and appreciate it in context. And there's a skill to writing a good review. It's not just sort of like thumbs up, thumbs down, or rating it on a scale of out of 10. I think good reviewers can write really well. I think Roger Ebert is the great example of a film critic who he reviews films, but he's really studying and analyzing and interpreting them and helping you understand whether or not this is a thing that is good to exist. It's not so much would I enjoy it or would I not enjoy it. It's, is it a good thing that this film exists or not? And I think that's what I love about Roger Ebert's writing. And Roger Ebert had some negative things to say about video games, but he was a smart and erudite person and really interesting. But there is a professional class of reviewers, video game reviewers. Like, it's something that people do for a living, write for major publications, and including gaming publications. Scholarly writing on the far side, way over there, that's what I do. This is, although I've done some of the middle game criticism too, but the far right, this is where you write something, it's submitted to an academic journal, it's reviewed by other scholars in the field, they decide if it's good or not. Often this writing is going to be disciplinarily focused, so you might write about games from the standpoint of literary studies, or games from the standpoint of psychology, or games from the standpoint of game studies. Game studies is its own discipline, but it has its own history and its own methodologies. And so this is usually written by professional academics for an audience of other professional academics, and it tends to be somewhat dry kind of writing. You might find it somewhat dry, but I can certainly enjoy it. There are certainly some really some good writers in that field, and that's what it is. So those are the things that I've assigned to you so far. So the article by Lane Nooney and the article by Carly Kosterek, those are both published in the journal Game Studies. Those are both peer-reviewed articles, and pretty detailed. Those are both historically focused. A lot of the articles in that journal Game Studies are actually more focused on theory, literary theory or game theory. But those two that I sent you were more historical, which is why I like them. But anyway, so those are, Yeah, those are usually asking questions like how should we be studying or how should we be talking about video games. So in the middle, and this is a much more nebulous field, and this is harder to describe and it also includes a lot of different things. But basically, it's good writing about video games. I think that's a good thing I should probably include on the slide. But it's interesting writing about video games. It can be evaluative. I think there is an implicit evaluation whenever you spend, if you're going to write 1,000 words on something, it should be something that is worth your time. Like if you want to write 1,000 words and expect people to read those 1,000 words, you're not going to do that for a game that's garbage, unless it's like interesting garbage, or unless it's garbage and this tells you something about society or whatever. But most of the time, you're going to spend your time on things that are worth spending your time on. These are often focused on play, and this is where, to go back to Kelly's question, you definitely need to be using your first person when you do game criticism. Like you are the one experiencing these things, so it makes sense. Not always. Like in game criticism, you can certainly write in other ways, but that's the idea of you as a person being the experiencer of the game is really important, because often in video games there is not an objective experience. Like there's no way to experience, like Edith Finch is the game I'm playing right now, in an objective way. I can only experience it my way, and I can tell you about my experience of it, but my experience of it is either at least subtly, but probably wholly different from yours. Like I might go, like for example, I think some of you played the game, so you might know what I'm talking about. Like when I approached the house, I think I was supposed to go to the front door first, but I didn't. I went to the side door because I was like trying to do sort of a perimeter sweep to figure out what the heck is going on here. And then I ended up in the garage, and I couldn't get back out of the garage. You might have gone up to the front porch first. I think I was supposed to go to the garage, but I think you were supposed to go to the front porch first, find it locked, and then go to the garage. So if you went to the front porch first, you and I have experienced different games. That's a subtle difference, but it might be a big difference. Who knows? And it's hard to say because we can't experience each other's experiences of the game. So that's why game criticism especially is going to be focused on those kinds of things. I mentioned new journalism, and I said something like that earlier. That's a style of doing journalism where the writer is part of the action, basically. And I don't know if Kate's watching; she may have more to say about that if she knows more. Kate's our journalist in the class, but it's something that it's a way of explaining something, but kind of not reporting in that kind of I don't know breaking news kind of way. It's more like let's go study this thing, and here's my story of how I got there. It's hard to explain, but you'll see some examples here in a minute, I hope. So what we're talking about for this class and for this project, close playing, it's really coming from this side of the map in terms of, if this were a map, if this were a continuum, we're really thinking about game criticism with a tinge of scholarly perspective, maybe. We're not really interested in reviews. So I'm not really asking you, is this a game worth playing? I know it is because I asked you to play it. But what can we learn about it? What did you notice about it? What do you think it means? How do you interpret it? Those are the questions that I'm hoping to see you explore in your essays. Okay, so a few terms, and I think this is kind of building up to something. So when we're talking about, what we're talking about when we talk about video games is understanding video games as a kind of text. And notice my phrasing there, because text is a word that can mean lots of different things. It can mean the thing that you send someone with your phone, as in a text message. We often will say, I sent someone a text. Text can also mean alphanumeric inscription, so like words on a page, we could call that text, or a kind of file format. It could be a plain text document. So I want to be clear that when we talk about video games as texts, I mean that in the literary theoretical sense, which is what you see described here. This is anything that can be read, and the act of reading is what makes something a text. And you will find disagreement about what can be read and what can't be read. Certainly books can be read, films can be read, stop signs can be read. Can events be read? That's a question. So can we read something that happens to us? Maybe not. I mean, maybe we can just describe it. That's where we get into kind of the edges of it. But for any situation, well, maybe not necessarily a situation, but anything for which we can identify a meaning and talk about how it comes to that meaning, how we as the reader come to that meaning of that thing. If we're doing that, if we're doing reading, we are talking about a text. And I know it's very abstract, but that's what we're working with here. This idea of a text and this definition owes a lot to the philosopher Roland Barthes, who you'll see Diane Carr is quoting and referring to a lot in her explanation of how to do textual analysis in video games. So there's an article, I'm going to ask you to read it. It's like 6 pages by Diane Carr, and she has a explanation of how she thinks we should do textual analysis with video games. And for her, that means that when we do textual analysis of video games, we are thinking about how meaning emerges during play and conceptualizing interpretation itself. So if we think about the opposite, like if we think about analyzing the text of a book, right? So here's, well, this is actually not a great example because it's an unusual book, but this is the only book in arm's reach. There's more over there, but I don't want to go that far. But this is, the meaning emerges as we read a book, typically through several stages. Like we pass our eyes across the text, we decode those letters and words into sentences, and then we understand what they mean. There's more to it, but that's kind of the fundamental thing that happens when you read a text, right? Like a literary text. But whenever we read a video game, meaning emerges during all kinds of different ways. It can emerge through what we hear, through what we see, through decisions that we make, and through consequences of those decisions, through skillful or unskillful execution of different sequences. And meaning could occur and emerge at any moment in that. Like we could find any of those moments significant, and I mean that in the literal sense, like signifying something for us. Think about all the games that we like by Molly Industria and Everyday Arcade that we looked at yesterday. Those games often use their mechanics significantly. So the thing that happens when you do XYZ, that's what matters. Like that's where meaning emerges from in the game. It's not from the words on the screen, but your understanding of what those words describe about the decision that you made, or so on. And so we've got so many more layers with video games, and that's why they're complicated, that's why they're interesting. But it's helpful to kind of break this down into a methodology. Okay, I've kind of been on a roll for a bit. Let me take a look back in Discord and see if anybody's got any questions. Ooh, neat. Yeah, indeed. Okay, sorry, I'm just kind of looking back here. Oh, you're all talking about other things, but that's fine. Speed running. Ooh. Okay, cool. Actually, so I don't know how you all got to this because I haven't scrolled all the way back, but I see you all talking about I Love Bees, which is actually really interesting because I actually have a link to something related to I Love Bees at the end of the slideshow. Oh, and Kelly, I see your question. You mean actually embed it in the essay? Yeah, if you can figure out how to. Like, I say that because like Microsoft Word does, I think it does let you include video, and maybe Google Docs does. If you can't figure out how to actually make them the same like file, just submit them separately in Canvas, and I can show you how to do that if you don't know how, but it's just submit them as separate submissions, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I Love Bees, I don't know. Pretty broad tangent here, but I Love Bees was an alternate reality game that was a promotion for Halo 2. I think it's Halo 2. Pretty sure it's Halo 2. And an alternate reality game is a definition I really like for alternate reality games is that they are, actually this is actually a really good segue for this slide I have on right now. Let me get to it. So an alternate reality game is it's like a video game, except instead of playing it on a computer or a video game platform, you play it on the real world, which means that it has to do with interpreting things that you encounter as a person, but you interpret them to have meaning in the context of a video game. So the kind of, I guess, MacGuffin in I Love Bees was a website. It was ilovebees.com, which I don't think is up anymore, but I think somebody has mirrored it now on like ilovebees.co. Let's see if it works. Yeah. So the MacGuffin was this website, like Margaret's Honey website, that sort of got hacked by a sentient artificial intelligence that was leaking all these messages. And then people that were discussing this on different forums figured out that there was somewhere on the site that had a bunch of GPS coordinates and timestamps. And then they figured out, hey, those are locations of payphones. And so let's go stand by those payphones at that time and see what happens. And then, hey, it rang. And there was a bit of audio. And I got a recording of that audio. And we can put it together and it tells this whole story. So I Love Bees was really elaborate, really interesting. Yeah, but it was an alternate reality game. Another definition for that is like alternate reality games are role-playing games where you play as yourself, which is another kind of thoughtful, abstract way of putting it. Alternate reality games have an interesting history. And I used to teach a whole class on it. And I say used to because I don't plan to teach it again. But I taught a class called Transmedia Fiction for a couple years, several years actually, and where we ended up making an alternate reality game and running it. I have two reasons I don't plan to teach that class anymore. One is that I think just the state of alternate reality games is different now, and they're not as popular or familiar to people. I think they're interesting historically, but they're not really like going on as much anymore. And they're hard to know about ahead of time. Like they just sort of spring up and then like, oh, here's this thing that somebody did. But a lot of the people that were making alternate reality games in the early 2000s, like I Love Bees, a lot of those people have moved on to other careers and they're just not doing it anymore. And I think a lot of that, the way that they moved on has to do with how the web has changed radically, you could say, in those 20 years into something really different. And regrettably, there is actually an article, I've got a link to it later. I've linked to it just as further reading, but it's an article by Adrian Hahn, I'm pretty sure he was one of the designers for I Love Bees, analyzing QAnon and talking about how a lot of the structures of QAnon, the conspiracy / cults, that this is another reason I make this reading optional, is that like QAnon was all over the place last week, and in a very much engaged in the riot that was deadly, really disturbing. And so if you don't feel like engaging with that at all, I totally get it, and I kind of don't either myself. But it is a really interesting article where he kind of breaks down QAnon in terms of game design and tries to analyze it from the perspective of a game designer, and it's really interesting. And basically he kind of points out that the things that made QAnon successful are the same kinds of things that made I Love Bees successful, and that's a really kind of creepy conclusion to come to. And so that's I don't know. I'll leave you with that. But anyway, that's what we're doing. And part of the interesting thing with ARG's alternate reality games is they have to do with interpretation. Like they're all about interpretation and reading. It's all about saying like, this is not a hacked website. This is a part of a puzzle that has to do with a video game. And where does this puzzle fit? And what do I interpret this as meaning? And then once you play alternate reality games, like I was pretty engaged for a few years, you get to the point where you start to see everything as potentially part of a game. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's kind of like the Tetris effect, where you start to see things sort of fitting into boxes. But I remember when I was playing alternate reality games, every now and then I would get like a weird package in the mail, like a coin with a cat on it. And it would be because game designers knew that I was a potential player, and they would send out these kind of clues basically to potential players. And so I would get hooked into things like that. But I do remember every now and then I remember one time when I lived in Florida, I got something in the mail that was this like apocalyptic screed. And I was like, is this a part of a game, or is this just some random like cult spam mail, or what is it? And I never found out. So, but that question is the idea that the world could have that kind of hidden structure to it can be really interesting and appealing, but it can also be really poisonous, as we're finding with QAnon. So that's where that's kind of where I kind of got off that's why I don't engage with ARGs that much anymore. But anyway, textual analysis, that's what we're doing. Sorry for the tangent, but I think that was an interesting tangent. Okay, so we're talking about, oops, I don't know where the rest of the columns are. I forgot to animate the other columns. Anyway, in the article by Diane Carr, she breaks her methodology down, and I wanted to explain it in my own words to see if it helps, because she's doing it in a fairly technical way, and I can add a couple examples perhaps that'll help you understand it. But for her, she says that when we do textual analysis for video games, we're really trying to do 3 different things at once, and they overlap and interlock with each other, but we can talk about them separately. So first of all, we're going to talk about the structure of the game, and that's what we did like yesterday, day before, whatever that was, when we break down the mechanics, the rules, the goals. That's kind of what I would call the ludic structure, or the gameplay structure of video games. There are other kinds of structures that you could talk about as well, and do a structural analysis of, like at the narrative level. You could talk about characters, plots, things like that. Those would also be part of a structural analysis of a video game if it has narrative as one of its components. You could also talk about interface and programming and all kinds of other things as a kind of structure. So that's kind of the easy one. Textuality and intertextuality are much more abstract. So textuality is when we're focusing on interpretation. Like, it's not just do I have a gun and can I fire it, but what does it mean that I have a gun? Why do I have a gun? Why not something else? And what does that mean about whatever the designer's trying to say, or what I understand it to mean in the context of today's society vis-a-vis gun rights legislation. Like whatever, like that's where you kind of get to the so what, or the like the academic thesis of what you're writing, and that's something that I kind of expressed facetiously there, but that's where you're unpacking, you might say deconstructing, you're kind of breaking it down to the things that it says that it didn't know it said. The game might be saying that it didn't mean to say, but that you interpret it to say. Like that's your work as a critic or as a analyst. You're finding the meanings that aren't obvious, and that's what you're doing when you explore the textuality of it. Textuality is the sense of being a text. Like what are the things about this that make it a text as opposed to something else? So in a book, obviously, like there are various aspects of the textuality of a book, and one has to do with just the like the font, right? So the font is a way in which these words have meaning, but because they chose this particular font, it might mean in a slightly different way or with a slightly different flavor than if it were written in Courier, right? That would, I think, be a pretty different font. As it is, it's written in, I don't know what that is, but the cover anyway is Bingiat ITC, I think. But that's that title font is characteristic for the Choose Your Own Adventure brand. So when you see that font being used, it kind of reminds you of it, which I think is interesting. That's also the font for the title logo for Stranger Things, and I think that was on purpose. Anyway, the intertextuality is the third column. It's all the way over there, and intertextuality just means that no text exists by itself. And so when we look at a Choose Your Own Adventure book, and again, it's the only book I have here, like this is number one in a series, so there are other books like this, and so we interpret it that way. It's also referencing, it's got the picture of it's supposed to be the abominable snowman on the cover there. So that's a story we might have heard. If we haven't, we could certainly find other examples of it. It's something that we already know that informs our position as the reader even before we picked up this book. So before we picked up this book had a textual field in which it already existed, and we participate in that field, bringing to it all the things that we've already read and already know when we pick this up, and we decide what to do with it. So intertextuality could also be thought of as like links to other texts, like other references. I don't know if this is a book with a lot of other references, honestly, but it certainly references other like travel narratives and just like the urban legend of the abominable snowman, and there's also references to colonialism throughout the book. So there are other things that, if you knew them, would inform your interpretation of the book. And so that's what we're looking at when we look at intertextuality. So it's sort of the things that aren't literally here, but that are conceptually here, that we're aware of through our experience. The House of Danger, yeah, that's I have multiple copies of that one. I think they're in that room actually, but yeah, House of Danger. I think House of Danger, I'm not totally familiar remembering the timeline, but I want to say House of Danger was actually the original Choose Your Own Adventure #1, and then this Abominable Snowman was #1 in the reissued series, and I think House of Danger might have been the first one, but I don't know. The first one would actually have that brand name. Anyways, very early one at least. Very goofy too. I think they're all goofy, honestly, but that one I remember being really unusual. Like you go into a house, but it's also like you go in a house and then you enter a room, but it's also a spaceship, and then now you're on Mars, and just like it seems really random as you read it. So here's an example, because I think this is all very abstract, and so let me give you a couple examples and then instructions. So this is the classic example of how to interpret textuality beyond simply reading letters and numbers. This is the classic example. This is from Roland Barthes' essay on visual rhetoric. This is from the Rhetoric of Images. That's the name of the essay that this appears in. I imagine if you've taken the visual rhetoric class, it might include this essay or things like it. But just as an example of what Roland Barthes does with this sort of image, is he breaks it down into two levels at least, and possibly 4 or 5. But like you can get really bogged down in Barthes' like terminology and levels, but I think these two are pretty easy. So there's the denotative message of this image, which says, here's some pasta. Literally it says, this is pasta, right? So Panzani is a pasta company. These are their products, and that's what it denotes. That's what the image literally says. But figuratively, or metaphorically perhaps, it connotes something else. It connotes a sense of Italianicity. So there's nowhere in here literally that says the word Italian, but the idea that it's in this string bag and there's a tomato and onions and I don't know what that is, mushroom maybe. This idea that we've just come from the market in Naples, like this is, that's kind of implied. Like we can imagine different narrative scenarios around which this moments might occur, and those have an Italian flavor, and that's on purpose. Like that's something that the advertisers, the designers here wanted us to think about, and that's something that we can all recognize when we look at this, hopefully. But I say we, that's something that we can recognize because we've seen other things like it, because we have an impression of Italy and what kind of food they have, and we've had pasta before, and so there is a learned aspect to this and a culturally specific aspect to this, to the connotation angle, certainly. So like if you've never heard of Panzani the brand, or heard of, or never seen spaghetti packaged that way, you might be confused by this image, and that would be, you know, understandable. But if you do recognize these things, the way that you're recognizing it is in the connotated meanings of this, not in the denotated meanings of it. So anyway, this is just Roland Barthes' classic example. But there's also an interesting analysis you could do with Tetris, I think, that also can contrast these levels, because and Tetris is also great because it illustrates sort of the challenge of doing this with video games, which is that the bricks by themselves do not denote anything. Like the bricks are bricks, and that's what they are, right? I mean, in terms of their use within the game, their role is to be manipulated in order to accomplish the puzzle solving to complete the levels. I assume you know how Tetris works, but if not, you fill in a level and then the level goes away. That's your goal. And so the bricks by themselves are devoid of semantic value. However, people have interpreted the game, and these are interpretations that I think Janet Murray at least kind of meant this, hers kind of tongue-in-cheek, like she sort of meant it as a joke, but I think there's some merit here, where James Paul G writes that, you know, maybe Tetris is an escape into a desire for order in this time where things are really, frustrating. Maybe this is a time, Tetris is a kind of escape from that into a place where you can manage the order of it. Or maybe it's a metaphor for overtasked lives. Or I think I see someone putting the other one in here. Yeah, so then there's the glory to Mother Russia, the fitting in on into Soviet life. Reading of it, that's another one. These are things that are connoted, right? They're not literally stated in the game, but they're connoted or suggested by what else we might know about the game, like the fact that it's a Russian game, which we know not from what it looks like when you play it, but what the box art looks like. There's usually a picture of the Kremlin or of Russian imagery on the front of it. Often it's written with the R in the Cyrillic style, and it was what's his name? Alexei Pagin? Starts with a P. I can't think of the rest of his name, but he's a Russian, and so the game was created in Russia. So it has that Russianness associated with it, but that's an association that we bring to the game that is not actually in the level that, as you see here on this Game Boy screen. So anyway, those are ways in which we could interpret and do this. There was a great, I don't know if you're referencing it, but there was a great video of like a viral video, I remember years and years ago, of like the Tetris god like dropping different blocks down, and I don't know, it's funny. Anyway, so here's some things that I want to do. Sorry, I've been going on for a bit, but I've got a couple of things that I would like for you to do before we see each other again and chat around. One, I've got some things I'd like for you to read, and focus on these ones that are linked here if you need to. These are fairly short, but I think I think it's pretty reasonable to read all of these in a couple hours. Maybe let's say we'll get back together at 1:20 so that I can give you a full 2 hours on this. But read all of these. These are fairly short. Some are a little bit longer. Some are very short. It varies. A couple of things I need to explain about some of these. Some of these do have spoilers, and I noted that for these games that I know some of you are playing, which like Gone Home and BioShock. I don't remember if this one has spoilers for Never Alone. I don't remember there being a lot to spoil in that game, but just FYI, it might. This one, focusing on Carrion, does discuss suicide or suicidal ideation, so just the content warning for that. If that's something you're uncomfortable with or don't want to deal with right now, that's okay. If you want to skip that one. For this one, for different heads, let me show you this. This one actually, it's a PDF, and then you can read the whole issue, but this is a zine, and there's several articles within it, but the one I'm interested in is this one called Different Heads. So if you go here, it's the one that starts here. So it's really just like these 2 pages, I think. So take a look at that, and then Animal Crossing. Most of these are just on blogs, and so read those that way. If you do want to read that article about QAnon, this is it. I would recommend focusing on the others. It's Adrian Hahn. It's maybe something to read later if you're interested. I'm not sure if I'm interested, honestly, because QAnon is so disturbing and frustrating, honestly. So here's what I'd like for you to do with each of these, and I'll share the links to all of them in the resources channel, and if I have time, also Canvas, but I'll put them at least in the resources channel in Discord. For each of these, just a couple of pretty basic questions I want you to take note of as you read these. So actually write these down because I'll ask you to share. For each of these blog entries, essays, articles, whatever you want to call them, who do you think of as the audience? What do you think the author expects us to already know as they describe the game? In some cases, they will kind of assume that we've already played it. Other cases, they will describe the gameplay. What other games do they discuss? What other writers are referenced or linked? Just anything else, right? I mean, especially pay attention to how they describe gameplay if they do, because that's something that you'll be doing probably in your essays. So check that out. And then finally, this is sort of like if you get done with reading those, take a look at the website that it's hosted on. Some of these are hosted on game blog sites where that's all that site is for. In some cases, these are hosted on, like one of them is hosted on vice.com, but it's like a gaming focused section of Vice. So take a look around the context for where this essay is published, and there's a good chance you will find an article, essay, or review of the game you're studying this week, and I think that could be a helpful thing to just have as a reference. So see if you can find one, but that's sort of like the extra credit or the optional part of it if you finish these. Okay, so that's the last slide. Let me see, are there any questions? Oh no, not yet. Okay, cool. So I will wrap up the stream, but I'm gonna go in now and into the resources channel and add the links to these articles. But of course, if you've got the slides, if you've already looked at the slideshow from Google, you can click the links there to access them as well. But please read these again. Let me go back to that slide. Definitely these, the ones that are linked, right? I mean, these are all pretty contemporary, pretty short, but interesting. Diane Carr's Textual Analysis is the one that I kind of gave you the gist of it just now in the last few slides, but I think it's also useful to see her more detailed and scholarly explanation of what she's doing. So take a look at that. And then Pilgrim and the Microworld, I just think the writing is really interesting. So check that out if you are interested in just kind of how to write about video games in a really I don't even know how to describe the style. So check it out and let me know if you have any ways to describe it. So, cool. Is that good? Okay, so let me just type a question here just to make sure. So, what do you all think? Back here from 1:30 to 2:30? I'm posing this question. So 1:30 to 2:30, about an hour discussion in Discord. That's what we've been doing the past couple times we've done that. And I thought that was a good length. That was a good discussion. And also, it's certainly something you could contribute to after the fact. I will probably set up a Google Doc of some sort to add some notes to. So if you are watching this asynchronously after the fact, you could contribute to that if you're not able to join us in real time. But yeah, 1:30 should be good for me too, I think. Let me just double check my calendar, make sure I don't have to take anybody anywhere at 2. I don't think I do. Not a lot going on these days, but there are some things. No, I'm good. Just checking. Yeah, that's fine if you had to dip out early, of course. All right, great. So I'm going to wrap up the stream. Thanks for watching. Sorry I got started a little late and I even ran on a little longer than I had hoped, but I hope that was helpful to explain kind of what we're doing here and what kinds of things you should be thinking about as you work on your oh yeah, there's a good question from Scott. I'll show you that before I wrap it up. But yeah, and actually 1:30, Kelly, instead of 1. Let me show you the 2 texts on Canvas, and I'll link to these two, but I can show them to you also. Well, here it is. But so if you go into, like, I'm on Canvas, I think it looks a little different for you, but if you go to the files, like click on files in the navigation for the course on the left, and then you go, there's a lot of stuff in here that I'm not assigning. It's just imported from previous versions of the class. Some of these are really good, new journalistic kind of things like Ben Abraham's piece here. But the, where are we? Permanent Death, that's actually the same thing, isn't it? Anyway, that's his full-length study of, what game was it? Spec Ops? No, okay, I'm blanking on what game he was playing. Anyway, he goes through a permadeath play of a game, and it takes him like a year. And it's really, and he kind of just documents his progress. Really interesting. Okay, so but what I'm asking you to look at today, so Sudnow, Pilgrim in the Microworld, is this PDF here, and like I said, the chapters are fairly short, so read the first two, and I mean you can read more if you want, but it's the first two will give you a good sense of what he's doing in this book. Interestingly, he has passed away, David Sudnow, but before he died, he released this book into the public domain. He was just like, hey, anybody who wants to read it, here it is. So that was pretty cool of him. So the chapters aren't numbered. So it's Memory is the first chapter that you have here, and then there's sort of an interlude chapter called DOA, which is just half a page, and then the next one is called Interface. Yeah. So then read these two. Very much autobiographical, anecdotal kind of style, but just really interesting. And then Diane Carr is in here too. It's this one. I don't know why it's called 306. I don't know what that file name. I don't know what the legacy of that file name is, but this is the essay. It's a conference paper. Okay, so and I'll link to all these in the resources tab, and also possibly in Canvas. It takes me a while to type all these things out, so I'll try to get that, but I'll do the resources first. Cool. Okay. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Have a good day, or I'll see you in a couple hours.